two, one.
Good evening and welcome to Rights of a Free People, a television show brought to you by the ACLU of Rhode Island. I'll be your host tonight. My name is Carolyn Manis. I'm an attorney in private practice, and I sit on the boards of both the local ACLU in Rhode Island and also on the national board. My guest for this evening is Nick Inglis. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming. And our topic tonight is going to be net neutrality.
Yes.
So we have a lot of work for you to do because the amount of information I know about net neutrality, you can fit in a thimble.
Well, we have what a little under half an hour, so I think we should be able to get it across.
Okay, so by the end, I'm going to be an expert. But let me first tell you what my understanding of net neutrality is. First, it's something that we're in fear of losing.
Yes.
So we want to maintain net neutrality.
Very much so.
Okay, and net neutrality means that when you have access to the internet, it's the same for everybody.
Yes. That is the goal, so that whenever anyone opens their browser, they're getting the same internet as everybody else. And we're allowing individuals the freedom to browse to whatever sites, and there's no preferential treatment of specific sites, and everyone is able to express themselves on the internet freely.
And then the idea that we might be losing net neutrality, which you said might happen in April?
It's going to happen in April. April 23rd is when the federal repeal of net neutrality is completed. So on April 23rd, net neutrality is no longer something that's enforceable, and the FCC will let it expire.
And there are many things that are bad when we lose net neutrality.
Yes. So since the inception of the internet, net neutrality was an assumed right of everyone that was using the platform. It was simply the bare minimum. The Obama administration then implemented rules that codified net neutrality and made it so that ISPs, the telecoms, the big companies, the Verizons, the Comcasts, the Coxes of the world have to abide by net neutrality principles. So that's what actually codified it, was during the Obama administration.
Okay, so we've got to remember,
yes,
if I don't understand all the terms you're saying,
yes,
my guess is that some of the viewers aren't either. So when you talk about an ISP.
Yes, an internet service provider.
And so that would be like Cox or Verizon?
Cox, Verizon, Comcast is another big player, although less so in Rhode Island.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what else happens as a result of the codification of net neutrality, and once we lose that codification in April?
So the Obama administration said that we need to, ISPs, the internet service providers, the big telecoms, they need to provide net neutral internet services. So there's no preferential treatment, there's no pay to play, there's no putting the finger on the scales to make it so that specific content is more freely available. It was only when the telecom giants started to look at new ways to generate revenue that net neutrality needed to be codified. So since the inception of the internet, we had net neutrality, and then it was violated by various ISPs, and then these rules came into effect. Since the Trump administration has now taken over and replaced some of the FCC chairs, we now have rescinded net neutrality rules. So the Obama administration directive is now being rescinded, and we have until April 23rd for that to go into effect. So what's happened since then is individual states and attorney generals have been suing the federal government to reestablish those rules. But additionally, some states have gone further than that. Actually, many states at this point have gone further than that to try and pass legislation to codify net neutrality in their specific states, or their governors have signed executive orders establishing net neutrality for their state. So the first one to do this was Washington State, that established net neutrality at the state level. What we're doing here in Rhode Island, there are a couple of bills that are passing through the State House to establish net neutrality for Rhode Island and for Rhode Islanders. The first of those was a bill that was introduced by Rep. Kennedy. He put forward a bill that basically took the Obama era directive on net neutrality and applies it to Rhode Island. There are some concerns that at the state level, we can't override the federal rules. So we've actually taken another step, and this mirrors more two other bills that are at the State House right now. One was introduced by Rep. Regenberg, and the other by Senator DePalma. Those ones are more around the state's contracting capabilities. So what those bills do is they establish net neutrality, or they force contractors with the state to only utilize internet services that are net neutral. So if there is a service provider that decides that net neutrality is something they no longer want to abide by, those internet service providers wouldn't be able to be used by anyone contracting with the state. So it's an interesting way of establishing net neutrality for all. It's really challenging for a telecom or an ISP to establish two different ways of providing the internet. One way that's net neutral for state contractors and one way that's not net neutral for everybody else. So the goal of these bills is to make it more financially feasible for these telecom giants to simply stay with net neutrality as opposed to trying to violate net neutrality for all Rhode Islanders by using the state's contracting power. So, sorry, it's been an interesting discussion up at the State House on how to implement this. Yeah, it's
because I'm trying to think of the internet and like, how do you get information that's being thwarted in other places to come through in Rhode Island?
Yeah. So the ISPs like to say that the big telecoms, they like to say that this type of effort in establishing net neutrality at the state level is something that's extreme, or it's something that would be better served at the national level. But we already had this at the national level, and the ISPs fought against this. So we're now in this position of looking to the states to protect net neutrality because the ISPs and the new FCC chairman, who incidentally used to be a Verizon lobbyist.
Shocking. Go
figure. We ended up in this position because of the ISPs. So now they're saying, well, it has to be served at the federal level, but that's actually not the case. So we're working, a group of people from all walks of life and organizations around Rhode Island have come together to support these bills and these initiatives to hopefully get something passed before April 23rd, which is when the net neutrality repeal at the federal level goes through. So we have a deadline on this work as well, which is challenging.
So I'm thinking about two different concepts, and I'm not sure they're net neutrality specific, but one is like when you do a Google search.
Yes.
And I understand if you pay more, you might be like the top search.
Yeah. So that's a great example. Let's take it even closer to home. Let's say there's a Rhode Island entrepreneur, and they've come up with a new way to revolutionize e-commerce, so buying things online. Well, right now, Amazon is the big elephant in the room on anything e-commerce.
And if you want an elephant in the room, you probably can order it on Amazon.
I'm sure you could find one, I'm sure. But let's say a Rhode Islander has this idea to revolutionize e-commerce, and they build the site, they bring together a team of Rhode Islanders to build this new product, they bring it to the market, and then Amazon pays Cox or Verizon or any of the ISPs to slow down the internet traffic to that site. Well, that's effectively putting that new organization out of business. Even though their technology may be better, they may provide things faster and better for consumers. but that won't matter. Because essentially what we're doing in repealing net neutrality is taking the power away from individual people that are hopping on the internet and giving that power to major corporations to exert their will however they deem fit. So net neutrality is really a free speech issue. I mean, in that example, we would lose a Rhode Island business. We would lose the hours of work. We would lose a Rhode Island entrepreneur. That's not simply, I mean, I'm making this example up, but there are real cases of net neutrality violations. So Cox is our major internet provider here in Rhode Island. Cox has in the past blocked access to VPNs, and I know I'm talking net jargon,
I was going to say, what's
let me
VPN?
take a step back.
What is a VPN?
VPNs are ways that individuals can connect securely to corporate systems. That's one of the major uses for VPNs. So in the past, Cox has blocked access to this. So people that want to work from home for their company or connect at TF Green Airport or their local Starbucks or their local coffee shop, they wouldn't be able to do that because the VPN access would be blocked. It's not an acceptable practice, and in fact, Cox took a few steps back on that, and now VPNs are available. But one of the other things that Cox is doing is putting data caps on people that are on the internet. So you can only access so much data before they slow you down and put you at a lower service tier. So you're actually getting slower internet if you are a heavier internet user. All of these are violations of net neutrality principles, which in the past we could have done something about, but come April 23rd, we won't be able to any longer.
The other thing that I was thinking of is, how do you know what you don't know?
Yeah.
So like if I'm doing a Google search, and I just use Google because I always do, on something I want to know about a certain topic, or especially if I'm trying to check and see if something's fake news, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to Google it, and nothing accurate comes up.
Yeah. Well, you can see the effects of this in other countries, like China. China, for example, has obviously does not provide net neutral internet. They have extreme censorship that is run by their state government, as opposed to the ISPs. But those capabilities exist to influence you and what you can see and view on the internet. The technology exists already. It's simply a matter of the ISPs, these big telecoms, using that technology. So I like to see things that are in the news. Recently, we had the news of Cambridge Analytica, this company that harvested Facebook data and used that data to then influence the Trump campaign and influence voters based on the data that they had then taken. Well, this is a serious concern if we're looking at this from a state level. So state contractors are leveraging state data. This is the individual personal data of every Rhode Islander is in some type of system within the state, whether it's the DMV or it's some sort of medical care or there are numerous databases that the state holds that holds Rhode Island citizen data. Well, without net neutrality, that data could then be used for nefarious purposes, or these state contractors could be influenced to select a particular product over another product, and that then affects the state, our purchasing power, and the money that we're spending through our contractors. So there is a real and specific need for Rhode Island, in particular, to enforce net neutrality, to protect our citizens, to protect our data, and to protect our state systems.
Other than ISPs, what organizations are behind the push to eliminate net neutrality? I would imagine Amazon.
Well, actually, Amazon has to the best of my knowledge, not been in the fight. Although I could be mistaken in that.
Okay.
But if we're looking at on the side of enforcing net neutrality, it's a really wide coalition of organizations, and there's no one particular political viewpoint that's pushing this. I was at the State House testifying before the House Corporations Committee, along with the ISP's lobbyists and their associations' lobbyists. And what they like to say is that net neutrality is being pushed by the extreme left, the progressives. The reality is that it's not simply a progressive issue. This is an issue that's supported by everyone from the Gun Owners of America, MoveOn.org, Free Press, Consumer Federation of America, the AARP, American Libraries Association, Public Knowledge, the ACLU, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, as well as a number of companies, Facebook, Google, Netflix, Twitter, Tumblr, Kickstarter. It's not just one set of principles that are group or set of principles that are looking at this net neutrality issue. It's across a wide spectrum. And over 80% of Americans support net neutrality.
I can't believe 80% of Americans
agree on
understand
anything.
net neutrality.
Yeah. Or agree on anything.
This is true too.
But it's been an interesting discussion. I'm interested to see what happens next. So there's obviously some legislation, as we discussed, that's passing through the State House. We're also hopeful that the governor, in the meantime, since the legislative sessions tend to drag out for longer and longer, the April 23rd deadline that's coming from the federal government, it's concerning. Legislation may not pass. I mean, it's actually probably highly unlikely that we get legislation passed before the April 23rd deadline, which is incredibly concerning, especially to folks like me that are, run organizations that are reliant on a free and open internet. It's very concerning. My hope is that as a stopgap measure, and I'm a hopeful person, as a stopgap measure until legislation can be passed, our governor can sign an executive order establishing net neutrality in Rhode Island. So and that's not something that's unprecedented. Right now, the governors of Hawaii, New Jersey, New York, Montana, and Vermont have already signed executive orders ensuring that their citizens can access the internet freely, securely, without their ISPs playing any games with their internet.
Now, what is being done on the national level, if anything, to stop the April 23rd date, or is it too late for that?
There's really not much that can be done at this point. There was a major letter writing campaign. It was essentially ignored by the FCC. The FCC at this point, it's a 5-person board, I believe, and their edicts are essentially what it will be. Our now president changed up the composition of the FCC. It's now being chaired by a former Verizon lobbyist, and it seems as though the FCC will be doing the bidding of the large telecoms for the foreseeable future at the national level, which is concerning. But not only from a technology perspective, and technology startups are all very concerned about this. Also, major technology companies are concerned about this. But also, anyone who's concerned about free speech should be concerned about net neutrality. We can see other countries and where this could take us. We've seen internet blackouts or specific ideologies being blocked in other countries by the same filtering technologies that are available to our ISPs here in America. It's scary.
It is. It is. Now, what can we as citizens do, either locally or nationally, to help establish net neutrality?
Well, I hope everyone that's watching this program will visit netneutralityri.com. It's a website that's been set up by a group of us, a group of organizations that are a diverse group of organizations around Rhode Island looking to protect net neutrality. On that page, there's everything from ways that you can contact your legislators, you can contact the governor, and ask what their positions are on net neutrality and say that you support net neutrality. There are upcoming events. We had a House hearing at the State House. There will be a Senate hearing. Any concerned citizens providing testimony, it's always appreciated, or even simply showing up to show your support for net neutrality. It's important. You can also follow us on Twitter at netneutralityri or on Facebook as well.
Wow, this has been quite an education today.
I hope so.
It's like I've learned so much. I'm like, I can't believe it's that dire. Like you hear about it, and then you kind of tune it out.
There's so many things that are happening right now. Net neutrality is a harder concept. It's a harder topic for people to understand. And I think that in part has meant that it's gone under the radar for a lot of people. That doesn't mean that it's not one of the most pressing and important issues of our lifetime, potentially. It simply is. With the Trump administration creating this new path for the internet, one in which the power no longer belongs to the citizens, but belongs to these major corporations, they can exert their will over your internet experience.
Now, is the government, the federal government, involved at all in, other than, setting the FCC rules? I would imagine at some point they have some control over content.
So I would hope that there'd be legislation working through Congress right now at the federal level. It simply is dead on arrival with Republicans holding both houses. So I don't know that there's anything at this point that the federal government will be able to do or is willing to do to protect citizens' access to the internet.
Now, I know that both nationally and locally at the ACLU, they've had big campaigns fighting to maintain net neutrality, as we are one of the foremost First Amendment organizations in the country. So I would imagine that you could contact either your local ACLU or the national ACLU.
Absolutely. And there are resources through the ACLU to help you make a difference, whether it's nationally or locally. Until there's another election, I'd suggest that people use their time and their resources at the local level, at their state. And if there are people watching that are from outside of Rhode Island, there are likely efforts happening in your state. So if someone's watching from Massachusetts or Connecticut, there are efforts underway in those states as well to establish net neutrality.
Now, I recall back in the earlier days of the internet, probably before you were born, that the issue for the ACLU and for many in the public were these filtering.
Yes.
It's because for First Amendment reasons, if you filter out certain words or certain...
Still the same concerns, although the technology has gotten incredibly more intelligent, and the precision with which these filtering technologies can be utilized, it's to the point where if something were being affected, if you went on the internet and you went to look for a political issue, let's say reproductive rights, which is something that is also at the State House right now in Rhode Island, if the ISPs were keeping you from information, you would be hard-pressed to know that that was happening. Whereas in the earlier days of the internet, it was much more readily apparent when information was missing. At this point, that's much more challenging to identify where ISPs are actually doing things. And there have been prevalent examples across all the major providers, which is why we have legislation working through so many states. So right now, over 35 U.S. states, which represent over 70% of the U.S. population, are currently fighting the net neutrality repeal at the federal level by trying to enact something locally at the state level.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up for tonight, but I hope that the people out there really contact your local legislators, use the website that Nick has told us about, contact the ACLU before our information is censored to the point it becomes meaningless. For Rights of a Free People, I'm Carolyn Manis. Thank you, Nick Inglis. You've really educated me. I hope the people out there get out and talk to their legislators and do something so we can maintain net neutrality.
Thank you so much. Get involved.
Thank you.